podcast. Okay. Why, well, uh, I'm hiding you guys. So in case something happens, you can't hear me or something, please send a message or feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt me because I can't see you anymore. Yes, this week's topic is about theorizing for future or for good life. Last week we talked about how sociology can actually um, get involved in the discussion of utopia, of alternatives to the present, alternatives to the status quo. You see, in this week, which is based on the presentation of a paper I wrote a couple of years ago on well living or good life, is about actually showing how we can practically go into this uncharted territory of developing ideas around what type of future we want. But the dilemma is that any effort like this would come up with some kind of ideas that is subject to other people's acceptance or rejection, right? So they have any a sociology of utopia or theorizing for utopia or future for better future has an element of a very strong ideological element because it is about what to do and how to get there and from here and where we want to go. uh, but there are different ways of doing that. One way is just come up with a blueprint, with detailed blueprint based on a very specific ideology or theory, or you would produce a framework, a platform that is general enough to be inclusive, but also, and where would that inclusivity come from? You would say, where would your idea of future, how you make sure that your idea of future is inclusive? One way you possibly remember Ruth Levitas' approach, that she was suggesting that we would start by what? Do anyone remembers what she was suggesting as the very first step when we want to do utopia as a method? Archaeology. She was calling it archaeology, right? Which means, investigating different views and perspectives and unearthing their underpinning vision of what of good society, of good life. So if we do this and as we stay as inclusive as possible, we can learn a lot of lessons from all the efforts that are gone wrong, but also the efforts that have come up with have resulted in some good consequences. And of course, there's nothing out there that is perfect. So that's a process. And therefore, borrowing those elements from all those goodies and avoiding the baddies, according to our perspective, we can try to be as inclusive as possible. So this paper actually just starts by doing that. First thing first, it talks about, a growing movement in recent decades that strongly argue that, basing the good life on the issue of economic growth or GDP is far from enough. In fact, it can be very misleading because you can have countries with high GDPs, or you can have your country experiencing increases in the GDP. Everybody knows about GDP, gross domestic product.
Yeah.
The value of the entire value of the economic activities.
Yep.
Sometimes is known as the national income, although that's not really, that doesn't mean national income, but anyway, it represents how big your economy is, the activities, the value of the dollar value of the economic activities. And of course, the higher it is, the prosperous your country appears to be. But we know that doesn't really represent the how equally or unequally things have been distributed. So the issue of equality or inequality is being, it cannot be measured through GDP. So one example is our own country in Australia. I think if I remember correctly, between 2004 and 2012, the GDP was actually increased three times from about half a trillion dollars to $1.5 trillion. And if I'm not mistaken, it stays around that same level. But ask yourself, or maybe ask your parents, if their income or if their welfare improved three times during that period. The answer is mostly negative, except for maybe the people of the upper classes, that top 1% or top 1.1 point one, 0.1%. So this has, the issue of GDP being a good measure of prosperity and good life has been widely questioned. Although, despite this, I should tell you, and maybe I don't need to tell you about that. There are politicians, are policymakers, those who are in power, are constantly focusing on GDP and economic growth. You turn on the TV, news, everything is about, yeah, the health of the economy. Are we getting into recession? Are we past the inflation? Are the rate cuts are helpful or not, etc., etc. So the people on the upstairs, the politicians, the policymakers, even us during the elections when we go and vote, if we would hardly imagine ourselves voting for someone who argues against economic growth, because our jobs are very much tied to the issue of economic growth under capitalism. Remember, under capitalism. So there have been significant attempts, although at the international level and national level, despite the persistence of our concentration on GDP and economic growth, to widen their scope. For instance, by saying that, how about measuring how educated people are? Or how about measuring the distribution of wealth as well? How about measuring how happy and satisfied people are? Examples like Bhutan's gross national happiness as an alternative. Australians have also come up with the idea of National Development Index, ANDI, OECD Better Life Index, World Happiness Index, United Nations, Human Development Index, United Nations Social Development Goals. You see that these attempts that I call them beyond GDP movement, the beyond GDP movement, have actually become kind of popular, but mostly at the international level, mostly those who pursue alternative ways. But again, you possibly have already noticed that, again, everything is about measuring. So although we are broadening the scope beyond economy, but still we are measuring. Even we are measuring our happiness, how happy we are through, scales, surveys, etc., etc. And a few global events have actually accelerated this movement, this beyond GDP movement. Well, the very two important one is global financial crisis that significantly questioned the importance of wealth production, etc., etc. And when the COVID happened. But even despite this, the GFC happened, the COVID happened, we still see the economistic paradigm is still the very dominant one. But parallel to that, as I said before, we've got these new movements, the beyond GDP movements that are growing fast and broadly. Among them, for instance, I can refer to the well-being economy. That is that is the idea that we need to redefine or reimagine economy not as something that would result in quantitative improvements or quantitative growth, but rather on something that would result in the well-being of citizens. The more, the better. The more citizens are included in that well-being, the better. But again, you see, it's about fixing the economy, making the economy less profit oriented for a few and more well being oriented for the majority. Okay. And you see, again, it's the well being is considered as a goal for economy. But again, the concentration is on the economy. So it's a step forward, but not enough. You know, do you agree with me? Do you feel the same when you come across with such ideas?
Yep, pretty much.
Yeah, another movement is the degrowth movement. Have you heard of that movement that challenges the idea of constant growth, that we really don't need to focus on economic growth? Examples are, for instance, in Japan, for a few decades, maybe 3 4 decades, Japan hasn't experienced much of economic growth, but the welfare is quite of higher standard for most of the citizens, or for many. So from this kind of perspective, actually, we even need to degrow, because of, for instance, the ecological consequences of too much economic growth, too much exploitation of natural resources, etc., etc. And the global north is kind of in ecological and sociological debt to the rest of the world as the result of exploiting too much resources, and therefore the global north needs to shrink. Although people are divided if the global south should follow the growth model, and then when it's satisfied its basic needs, it would stop and move towards degrowth, or it should follow degrowth from now, only working on their qualitative aspect of life. Okay. So the question is that despite the rise of this, beyond GDP movement, why we haven't seen, a significant shift? Why is still the dominant paradigm is driven by the growth oriented, GDP oriented kind of ideology, and this would requires us to actually explore the real roadblocks, the obstacles, the system itself. If we can come up with many interesting and progressive demands that, for instance, the economy should become, more well-being oriented. We should go beyond GDP, etc., etc. These are all kind of reformist demands, but they're not going to really make a significant difference unless these demands are linked to some kind of analysis or understanding of what's going wrong with the system, and what are the obstacles, and in fact, at the end of the day, we should talk about capitalism. Is it possible to have these reforms and still stay within the capitalistic framework or not? Then the papers, moves on to argue that maybe we need to actually come up with new concepts, with new idea. It seems that the idea of well-being is very much diluted, toned down, if you like, or watered down. It's being kind of incorporated into the language of the elite, but the reformist part of the elite. If you guys watched Handmaids,
No.
No, I haven't heard of it. No.
It's a very interesting series. It's a highly feminist one.
I've heard
That
of
is
it,
about
but I haven't had the time to watch it because there's a lot of episodes.
yes. I think you can watch it on. Is that SBS? As on SBS channel on online, the online one. If I remember correctly. But anyway, it's a possibly time consuming. But if you watch it, you see that there are two parts into the system: the ones that are very upfront in exploiting women, and the ones that still belong to the elite, but they are the reformist ones. They want to make things more humane, but still that hierarchy is kept in place. So when the elite start to use your concepts like well-being and they water it down, that is time for us to actually, on the opposition to the system, or the critics, to actually move on and come up with new concepts, until later on again, when that concept becomes popular, the new concept becomes popular, the elite would adopt it. So that's why I have come up with the idea of well living. So this paper presents the idea of well living instead of well being. And where does that come from? It actually comes from Buen Vivir. It comes from an indigenous concept, although it's a Spanish, in terms of language, but it comes from Latin America indigenous movements. That means the concept means living well together. And then so I thought maybe I would turn it into living well together. I would turn it to well living instead of well being. So well being sounds very static. It's about being well, whereas well living, it means living well. So it's more process than just being static. And it also is rooted in indigenous movements. So the paper comes up with three key questions. So what are the built-in limitations of the reformist well-being approaches? Why not enough? The shortcomings of the beyond GDP. We welcome the beyond GDP. It's of course a step forward, but it has limitations. It's been around for decades, a number of decades. Even I remember, I think, and there's a famous quote from John F. Kennedy's brother, I think Robert Kennedy, that talks about, that criticizes GDP back in the 60s. Um, and then the second question is that what kind of insights we can get from more progressive, more transformative movements, the post-capitalist movements, the indigenous movements, the eco-feminist movements, the eco-anarchist movements, the eco-socialist movements, the eco-communist movements, etc., etc., that are more radical than just beyond GDP movement. And would those insights be helpful for us in order to come up with the new paradigm? A paradigm means something that is structurally and significantly different. It's not just, altering or modifying the existing ideologies. And also there's a perspective that I have pursued in my other publications, that is called communist perspective. This again comes from another movement that pursues the idea of commons. Anyone is familiar with the idea of commons, what commons are? Have you heard of the word commons?
I think so. Does that refer to like the majority of people? Like the lower
Oh,
majority?
yeah, that's one aspect when you talk about that. But commons is more related to shared resources. Uh, for example, a fishery, a forest, ecosystems. A lot of ecosystems are commons. No one owns them, right? No one owns them. But think of an ecosystem where, for instance, all the living beings in that ecosystem benefit from it as much as things would satisfy their basic needs, their needs, and they all contribute to the well-being of that ecosystem. or that web of, if you were not, comfortable with the concept of system, maybe that particular web of connections, a web of life, for instance, in a forest, for instance, all animals, all creatures, all are interlinked with each other, interrelated, and they don't exploit resources beyond the boundaries, beyond the capacities of their own ecosystem. Otherwise, the ecosystem would collapse. So the commons also refers to, if you may remember, to shared lands. This is also a concept that is applied to shared land, shared resources between humans. And if you may remember, one of the things that happened at the beginning of capitalism was the commons enclosure that capitalists started through the iron fist of the state to to enclose, to privatize shared lands that were commonly owned by many peasants in Europe, especially in England, and many of those peasants became landless, and that provided capitalism with an army of jobless people in need of wages, in need of payments, who moved to the cities and were put to work in the factories. You remember that, everybody? So commons also refers to, you can think of, I mean, I'm broadening the concept, of course. You can think of the indigenous people. Do they belong to their land, to their habitat, or their land belongs to them? You see, and the indigenous people don't have that conception of the land, belonging to them. They feel that they understand themselves belonging to that land, to that territory that they live in, and this is called a stewardship. So commons are not based on actually ownership, not even collective ownership, but rather collective. If you take an indigenous perspective, commons can also be used to refer to a territory, an ecosystem, a place, a space where actually everybody belongs to, and they take a stewardship role in it, not ownership role in it. And it's a very big difference. When you own something, you see yourself entitled to do whatever you like, to it. But when you consider yourself a steward, as the stewardship, that means you're looking after it. And that place would also look after you. Does that make sense? So you see that as an extremely radical and extremely progressive, because you can go, down the path of the Soviet Union or the China's communism and talk about or implement the idea of collective ownership, which is possibly more progressive than private ownership, because now the people own, but that is still ownership, means that they feel entitled to do whatever they like to their ecology. And we have seen the consequences of that. So that is stewardship, the concept of a stewardship, indigenous stewardship, or ecological stewardship, is far more progressive, in the sense that it puts people, that collective, in a much more constructive connection with their conditions, with their environment. Does that make sense? So this idea of well living is, coming from the indigenous. It also very closely tied to the idea of the commons, but in a much broader definition or notion of the commons. Not commons in the sense of, European shared land owned by a group of peasants, but rather, you can think of a digital platform as a commons. Okay, thank you. Yeah, you can think of how would a digital platform would function as a commons? In what conditions, in what situations? Of course, Facebook or Instagram, they're not commons. They are owned by Mark Zuckerberg, right? They're controlled, etc., etc. We contribute to it, and yeah, we on the surface we seem to be benefiting from it because it puts us in connection with our friends, etc., etc. But but that is not balance. That is not balance in the sense that huge amounts, millions upon millions or billions upon billions of money is being extracted out of those platforms by those who own them.
Maybe
It's a
Wikipedia?
place. Oh, yes, yeah, Wikipedia is a commons. Yes, it's much closer to the idea of commons. Well done, well done. So I think we've got a good understanding of commons. So the method that I have used is a bit different to the method that Ruth Levitus used, although I should acknowledge and admit that I was not familiar with her method when I was writing this paper. Maybe I would have adopted a little bit from her. But my method is, it's called, I call it in the paper reflexive method theoretical analysis, which means that, again, in simple terms, I look into all all the sayings, all the deeds and practices about good life across various fields, economic, political, etc., etc. But not only fields, but also movements, and more importantly, grassroots movements, to see what perceptions of good life they have, and I understand, try to understand them, try to extract elements of their understanding, and see how we can come up with a kind of a shared platform. Again, you see, this theory of this theory of well living itself is a commons that I have tried to set up, and it borrows good ideas from a very broad range of ideologies, theories, philosophies, even faith-based views and perspectives, indigenous or movements, progressive movements of global north and global south, and and tries to see how they can actually brought together into a kind of a conversation, and maybe put together like pieces, like the pieces of a puzzle, to come up with something that in the end would be only suggestive. It does not, the well-living theory cannot and should not be considered as a fixed, kind of a blueprint that an intellectual person or a group of intellectuals would come up out of their studies. But those studies should be there, and those studies are great sources of inspirations. In the on the Canvas web page for this week, you will see that, and also inside one of the slides here, you see that I have shared a presentation of of a national survey that I did with my team, of a group of NGOs and grassroots movements, only progressive ones, of course, and I have actually mapped their perceptions of good life, and I have presented that. It's a little bit too technical. Statistics being used, also social network analysis is used, but you can skip them. You can skip them, or you can just move. If you have, if you are interested, and if you have extra time, I really strongly recommend that. That would give you an idea where some of these ideas actually come from. And I wish I had more money, or more resources in order to expand that beyond Australia. Even within Australia, we only ended up having 96 respondents, which is not really a big number. But fortunately, the analysis of information showed that they are diverse enough. And remember that I have to criticize myself here, because this is only the presentation of the quantitative. And again, it's although it's revealing, but we only a quantitative only surveys the surface, only scratches the surface. We did interview some of those respondents, and they unfortunately ran out of money in terms of analyzing and publishing the qualitative aspects. And I'm looking forward to having some help, God knows from where, in order to complement that with my team. Oh, okay. So the rest of the second part, or the next section of the paper, present a brief history of the idea of good life. That, for instance, humans from the beginning have been pursuing good life, of course, and as our economic and political systems, as you know, as we moved away from being hunter gatherers into agriculture, and production became more and more complex. Societies have become more and more hierarchical. The idea of good life has also become tangled up more and more with power, resources, and control. So the idea of good life, what is good life, is kind of has become a contested territory, a site of a struggle between those who have power and those who have. So if I have more power than you, or you have more power than me, you are, of course, have a greater chance to impose or propagate your understanding of good life than me, uh, on me. Or vice versa. So you see that the elite, as societies have become more and more hierarchical, the elite, have tried to actually impose their perception of what good life is. But the masses have never been passive constantly all of the time. The masses have also pushed back, and there have been movements, grassroots movements, that have come up with their own idea of good life, countering or contrasting the elite's idea of good life. One of the, perhaps, I would say, oldest division, between, what is good life, is a kind of a philosophical one that goes back way to the archaic, Greek philosophers, I don't know, 2,300 years ago or something. And it's a division between hedonism, like the Epicureans, which is about maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain. So if you maximize, a good life is about maximizing pleasure and minimizing your pain. So if you maximize your pleasure, and minimize your pain, you're going to have a good life. Versus the second one that comes from Aristotle, and it's called eudaimonic, or eudaimonism, which is about, even if you go through hardship and pain, if you actually fulfill your potentials and have a more, meaningful life, you are actually going to have a good life. So good life is not about, pleasure and versus pain. Sometimes, and many times, it is actually worth going through hardship, like what you guys are doing here. Going through the hardship of, education, and assignments, etc., etc., in order to improve your capacities. You would fulfill your potentials, realize your potentials, and that gives you, in the end, a kind of a more meaning to your life. So it's not all about. So you see, these two perspectives appear to be kind of very much oppositional to one another. And then among the but again, it's as I said before, because societies have been very hierarchical. The eudaimonic one, which is the, go through the hardship, go through the pain, so you will get something meaningful in the end. Pursue duty, pursue virtue, know your place. These have been mostly a kind of philosophy of good life, that was given to the masses. But for the sultans, for the kings, in the east, in the west, for the elite, it has always been hedonism, increasing pleasure and limiting pain with as limited responsibility as possible, because they were very kind of autocratic. When the more hierarchical it is, the more autocratic is, and therefore the more hedonistic are the rulers. So you see that plays some role. In religious communities have also come up with their own definitions of good life. Most of the time, it's just follow the God's commandments or the established path, and the more spiritual you are, and the more you closely follow the religious instructions, the better person you are, and you're going to have a good life here, and maybe if not here, in the afterlife. So that's also another type of, as you can see, another perspective about about good life. Until things get a little bit even darker, when the idea of good life is tied to the idea of civilization, and it becomes a kind of weaponized by the colonialists, European, especially European colonialists, but they were not the only colonials. Also, we've got the Japanese colonialism as well. So the idea of colonizers, the idea of progress, the idea of development, in these days, even in the post-colonial era, you have obviously, I'm sure you have been witnessing lots of mass killings, for instance, in the Middle East, the bombing people in order to export, democracy to them, as George Bush did, for instance, in Afghanistan, or in Iraq, and now we're dealing with the mess. So, in the name of democracy, in the name of progress, in the name of development, in the name of human rights, in the name of civilization, this colonialist and post-colonialist power have done lots of dirty things. Okay, I don't see the message. Was that removed, or? If you could unmute yourself, that would be better than me trying to find your message. Uh, okay, am I running out of time? No, we still have some time. Okay. Um, so, and then there's been a big shift, in terms of, in European, I don't go through the details of this. The idea is that there have been the paper goes through a number of philosophical perspectives in the past and more recently, especially after the European Enlightenment, modernism, liberalism, socialism, they're all utilitarianism. They all come up with their own ideas of good life. Even fascism, that has a very perception of an exclusionist perception of happiness. They even measured, they went for the Nazi, for instance, eugenics. But again, late it was also adopted in the United States as well. It was not just limited to Nazis. Or about making a race even better, genetically better, physically better, by selective, through selections, even by eliminating people that were considered as not, fit or suitable. The disabled people were eliminated, etc., etc. They were even measuring mother's milk, as or how tall the men are, or how muscular the men are, how blonde they are, blue eyes they are. So these were considered as the signs of superiority, but also signs of belonging to the group that deserve better life or good life, and the rest of humanities were seen as not worthy of having good life. And then after World War II and end of 20th century fascism, we've got the idea of, again, the idea of development. The idea of development became, especially economic development, became a very central criterion for measuring good life, for defining good life. And very anthropocentric, very Eurocentric, of course, although many countries became independent and classical colonialism collapsed, but still that perception, that Eurocentric perception of what is good life, under the title of economic growth and development, actually continued to influence other societies. And then in the post 80s, we've got neoliberalism that just leave everything to the market. You don't need to have the state interventions on behalf of people. Welfare state was dismantled or has become more and more dismantled, and happiness becomes the responsibility of the individuals. And then in the absence of a state, a state support, a welfare state, what happens to the people when they want to pursue good life? Of course, they turn to non-state actors. What are they non-state actors? The positive psychology, just be positive, try to be positive, work on yourself. You're the problem. The reason that you're failing is actually because you haven't worked on yourself. Fitness industry, self-help, the self-help bookshelves are growing, and they're the best sellers, online, as if that's a kind of a video training or whatever, or the books, etc., etc. And we were just talking about, the intervention of technology into our perception of health, post-humanism, digital embodiness, etc., etc. So they have actually become depoliticized our perception of well-being. So it has become very individualistic as well. And recently, we also see that some kind of stoicism, or a stoic view has become kind of common among, or popular among younger people. Anyone is familiar with this perspective? The Stoic and Stoicism.
Now I'm familiar with it. I don't know anyone that follows it personally, but yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean I've seen it on social media. I think there is also some studies showing that among some groups of young people, it's been kind of growingly. Um, I think possibly that guy, a famous guy, was very talkative and forgot his name, Jordan Peterson, to some extent, maybe to some extent, I guess, or people like him, that produce this kind of self-help thing. The idea is, of course, maybe I'm mistaken about him, but the idea here is that, you don't need to overcome your anxieties. You need to understand what you can change and what you can't change, and therefore don't bother yourself with things that, don't get anxious about things that you can't change. And what would be the consequences of this? What kind of good life this can promote? Of course, every ideology, every perspective has its own positive thing. For instance, individuals' responsibility, pursuing virtue, being nice to others, being nice to yourself, etc., etc. Remember, these ideologies and philosophies come like a package. They have goodies and baddies, and and that's why they are being sold widely, because they come as a package. But never get anything as a package. Try to dismantle such packages, get the good ideas, stay, and you're doing social sciences and humanities. You have learned how to be critical. Critical thinking is one of the most important skills you have developed. Try to dismantle them, separate or decipher good things from the bad things. What would be the bad things about, for instance, this perspective that says, don't worry about things that you can't change?
Um, I suppose like, well, benefits is that, you know, everyone should have some self-help to some extent, but like negatives,
Mm,
it reminds me of almost Michel Foucault's self-regulation, and it's like almost an entire philosophy based on self-regulation. So you can't really see any invisible pressures like some of the
mm.
postmodernists say, because your entire life becomes about that regulation almost. And it's like
Yeah, well done.
men aren't probably, they're not aware that they're regulating towards, you know, the masculine standard. They just think it's like, just think it's a good thing.
Yeah, well done. Yeah, that's great. What else? You know, you said you or me. Again, it's individual.
Yeah.
Again, that sense of collective in empowerment or disempowerment. To what extent you think this perspective can depoliticize us, make us less sensitive? I mean, if I can't change the fact that today is raining or is flooding. uh it's beyond my ability. Yeah, maybe, yeah, you're right. But how about, I can't change the political system as an individual. um I mean, really. Well, how about the history shows that a lot of things that appeared not to out of control or beyond people's control were actually being subject to change. So, again, it can result in depoliticization, individualization. Again, as you said, very well, self-regulation, internalizing control. You yourself do that for the system. You lose your systemic perspective, your understanding of the system and what's wrong with the system. System appears to be too big, too far away, uh, to be challenged or to be changed, etc., etc. Um, do you agree, or is that what you also think?
Yeah. I mean, what I was getting at is, uh, yeah, like that. I was saying how like stuff like, you know, traditional beauty standards, you won't be able
Yeah,
to notice. You can't notice that because you're too focused on improving yourself towards those beauty standards or something. And yeah, so,
yeah, okay. So so this part of the paper has spent some space, on critiquing the Beyond GDP movement, acknowledging so we get in the end, in the historical review of ideas good life, we get to the idea of, Beyond GDP thing in our recent times. And we acknowledge that, there are good intentions, but again, the criticism is that it shies away from deep examination of capitalist system itself. And it doesn't question the foundation. It seems that tries to reform a system that in the first place is the cause of many crises and problems that we have. And just by wishing that or demanding that this system would be fixed by, for instance, expanding our perception of good life beyond GDP or economic growth, and becoming a little bit more progressive, in our measurements, in the ways that we measure progress or we measure good life, we would be able to overcome the problems. Sounds a little bit problematic from this paper's perspective. Um, and even the concept like sustainability that initially appeared to be very progressive decades ago, but such concepts like sustainability have also been adopted, toned down, watered down, if you like, co-opted into the system, and it's more about sustainable. They call it ecological sustainability. Talk a lot about ecological sustainability or social sustainability, but practically, when you decode, you realize that their major concern is the sustainability of the economy. That they realize that if we overexploit nature, it hurts economic growth. So most of the time, their arguments for sustainability is tied to the idea that if you really want economic growth, you need to green it. You need to make it green. you need to make it ecologically sustainable. So it's more kind of a rationalistic, more rational um, capitalists who have actually come to conclusion that without ecology, without environment, without nature, capitalism cannot sustain itself. It says again, it's about capitalism sustaining itself, and they view nature still as a means to an end, which is the sustainability of capitalism. So, or for instance, those perspectives that thinks that citizens, the more happier these people are, or satisfied are, through those, measuring people through surveys or censuses, that's a proof of progress. Again, that can actually result in justifying the status quo. Yes, people's feelings and sense of satisfaction and happiness is important, but that's a consequence that you're looking at the symptoms, and you can make people happy by giving them making them more making them consume more of things that are not necessary for them, and not really needed, but you made them to want them. So that is that satisfaction really a good measure or good indicator of good life or not? Okay. um so it's again, questions can be raised, if for instance good life should only be related or about humans, how about non-human beings? And the issue of our interconnection with nature, the issue that good life is not about me and this moment, but rather also the community and the balance between the personal and the communal, the balance between collective and the individual, and the issue of reconnecting with the indigenous modes of living. That actually, when you look at the indigenous modes of living, from the first place, they actually don't separate humans and non-humans. They're very much anti-dualistic. And whereas when you look at the modern ways of understanding good life, they're very much, dualistic, individual versus society, society versus nature, culture versus nature, etc., etc. Whereas there are very interesting lessons that we can learn from the indigenous to overcome. So indigenous mode of living is not about just, they're not very much human centric, but rather they see humans and non-humans in inseparable. And we're familiar with that, under post-humanism and the previous conversations we've had. And we said the best post-humanists are actually the ones that were indigenous, right? And again, coming back to the idea of communism, in a commons, in a commons, in an ecosystem that everybody contributes, and everybody benefits. They contribute according to their capacity and they benefit according to their needs, without undermining or transgressing the boundaries, or the limitations or capacities of their own ecosystem. That perspective requires us to avoid any compartmentalization, separation. In our modern perspective, in modern society, we we classify things. This is ecological, this is political, this is economic, this is societal. Again, this has been a subject of one of my studies, and a 20,000 word paper has come out about the fact that even many activists suffer from this perspective, that they compartmentalize. We have so far in social sciences and critical social theory have been criticizing dualism, right? Dualities between nature and culture, between men and women, upper race and lower race, or whatever, upper class, lower class. But in fact, it is about compartmentalization, because if you go beyond dualism, you see that it's more than just two sides. It's more than just two sides. For instance, the way we see the society is divided between public versus private versus uh, uh, non non-for-profit versus ecology. So that's a kind of a compartmentalization, or what I call compartmentality, a mentality that is based on compartmentalizing the reality. And that's our paradigm needs to avoid this, needs to go for a balance, need to go beyond humans, need to go for a balance, need to go beyond dualism, even beyond not just dualism, beyond compartmentalization, seeing the reality as something that is divided. And that's, under capitalism, you say, economy is an economy. Leave the job of economy to economists and market, those who are involved in exchanges in the market. Don't bring politics in the economy. Don't bring, ecology in the economy. Don't bring the social concerns and about inequality into the economy. You see, that is they try to separate this based on their own ideology. But in a reality where things are healthy, things are not separated. Things are actually very much intertwined in a healthy way, and that separation, that reinforcement of separation results in lots of social and ecological ill health or illnesses. Um, okay, running out of time. Do you guys have time to stay longer, or do you want to leave, or and read the rest maybe later on, or maybe if I can manage to finish it tomorrow, next session, you would watch the rest of it. I'll leave it up to you. I don't know. I'm fine. I can stay as long as you guys want.
Yeah, I can stick around.
Oh, that's good. That's good. And the rest of the group are fine too?
I have to head off, but yeah, I'll read it in my own time.
Oh, okay. And let's see how far we can go into this, and I tried to make these slides, as kind of as extensive. So a lot of them sounds like, full sentences or full information. And also you've got the paper. So this idea, so now I'm trying to set this stage, and this in this in at this stage, to finally come with the idea of the well-living paradigm, which is, in it borrows a lot from the progressive movements, emancipatory movements, from the globe, as I said before, global north, global south, more particularly from the indigenous cultures and worldviews. That is more than human. It's post-capitalist movements, the perspectives that are more holistic rather than putting things into silos or compartmentalizing things, and the non-Eurocentric ones. Yeah, we've got a message here. Okay, Georgia is also heading off. That's fine. And Okay, so we've got three people yet. Okay, still with us. Yeah. Yeah. And the idea that, we're familiar with the idea of symbiotic. Anyone remembers symbiotic connections? I think, was it 1 week or 2 weeks ago? Again, that everything is interconnected in in kind of natural conditions, in healthy conditions. You expect these interconnections to be harmonious and diverse, and that, therefore, you look at nature, you see biodiversity, but this the biodiversity doesn't result in a situation where everything moves away from everything else. You see that everything works like an orchestra in a kind of a natural setting, uh, and even bad things will happen, like, for instance, volcanoes erupt, or floods happen. they even on long term have good consequences. They result in or bushfires happen when the bushfires are not the mega bushfires caused by climate change. I'm excluding that from my conversation. But you see that, yeah, you see, okay, thank you, and all the best. So you see that life is like a web of everything interconnected, and and therefore good life should be based on this perspective. When we get also insights from life itself, from nature itself. So so far I was saying that I'm getting, I'm trying to get good ideas from different philosophies and ideologies and indigenous and social movements, etc. But a great source of inspiration or insight is actually good life itself. Sorry, life itself. And when we look at the when we look at the life on the planet, we see that it's a web of interconnected things, that everything, everybody, every entity is symbiotically coexist with each other, benefit from each other, and give benefit to each other. So good life in this perspective, when we learn from life itself, is about participating in the interconnected existence, and looking at life as, life itself is a commons. Again, every living being and even non-living being contributes something to life, and life actually helps them to sustain themselves. So well-living involves commoning. Commoning is not, you see that I'm using that word as a verb. It's about, living in commons and sharing, but not going beyond the capacity, not hurting. So it's actively co-creating well-being for everyone and everything in the web. You see, compare this perspective with the modern, dominant perspectives, even the beyond GDP one. You see, this one is very much holistic, is very much is avoiding being anthropocentric, is avoiding being Eurocentric. It's trying to look at life as a web, and that everybody actually produces something valuable, and that's the concept of value comes into conversation. That value is not, that dollar price tag on something, but rather is their contribution to the well-being of the or the health of the totality of the entire system. So that is what we should consider as value. So there has been a pluriverse of alternative ideas, as I mentioned before. I don't need to, I can skip that. Post-growth movements, indigenous groups, liberation theologians, convivialists, green localists, and some of these names might sound, alien to you, but there's the subject of our conversations in SOCA 2400 next semester, if you're interested in doing that course. And we learn about these perspectives a lot, and then you will finally end up writing your essay on one of these that you choose yourself, about what they say and what they have achieved, these perspectives, these alternative perspectives, what capacities do they have in order to result in transforming capitalism, or going beyond capitalism, etc., etc. So it's that's why it's called pluriverse instead of universe. It's not unity in the sense of uniformity, but rather it's plurality of all these perspectives that are trying to question and challenge the status quo and come up with their own views of what good life is. In the end of the day, it's all about good life, isn't it? So uh, and then okay, yeah. So they provide, powerful views about, or visions about future. But the paper also argues that it's not actually adequate to actually to only come up with a vision of future. The well living paradigm shouldn't be only about the future, how, you know, a good future, but rather it should be about also about, you know, challenging the status quo, the current system, and understanding the current system. Because if we don't understand how the system works or fails to work, our visions only stay as nice ideas. You know what I mean? Rather than and it may not get anywhere. Even the well living paradigm. So the well living paradigm would also require us to actually be involved in understanding the capitalism. So the well, it's not adequate to just get insights from the indigenous, insights from all the goodies, but also we need to get insights from those perspectives or theories that are actually can help us criticize and understand critically understand the system, the capital. And what are they? What are the analytical tools that we need? You have already been familiar with that, from the Marxian tradition to the post-Marxian critical theory, the post-colonial theories, the feminist theories, the anarchist theories, the you know even the post-humanist theories. They all can actually help us to analyze, or if you may remember Nancy Fraser's, you know, analysis of unpaid work, you know, social reproduction, etc., etc. They all help us to actually develop an analytical approach. So yes, the good ideas, nice ideas about future, they're called normative. But it's not enough to be just normative, meaning setting up norms, new norms for future. But also we need to be critical and analytical. And that's why the well-living paradigm is about being both analytical and what? Normative. Both future-oriented, but also being critically and analyzing the system. So it's the anti-system critics also need to be incorporated. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the next part, maybe if you, yeah, this is the recording of one of my presentations that happened last year. We don't have time to, of course, watch that. It's a lengthy one. Yeah, 1 hour and a half. And it is about the presentation of the findings of our research about, you know, how, you know, what perspectives in Australia, the progressive ones, the progressive social movements and NGOs have of good life. And if you're interested later on and have time, you may watch that. Okay. The second part, um, I don't know, do you still have time? Do you want me to go through that as well? Or the second part is the presentation of, you know, the details. It goes into the details of what the well-living paradigm is. And so the core idea is that, again, the core idea is that, you know, whether our actions and systems that we have positively impact the sustainable regeneration of organized planetary life. It's not about if our actions and systems would make me as an individual happy. Yes, this is included, of course, But as you can see, this is more wider. It's bigger than that, and it includes not just me and my community or my ethnicity or my nation, but also all humanity and non-humans, and the planetary life, because we are all very much dependent on the planetary life. If the planetary life is hurt, if it is undermined, therefore, even if I am benefiting or enjoying some good life individually or as part of a community, it's not going to sustain. It's not going to last long. And even if it lasts long enough, but the rest of humanities or non-humans are suffering, what sort of value, what sorts of meaning my enjoyment, my prosperity is going to have? So you see, it has a very strong moral question into this. So it's not about me in this moment, not even about my community, but rather it's about, if the planetary life, the organized planetary life, not the disorganized one, of course, it can sustainably regenerate itself. And if our actions and the systems that we have set up would contribute to that or not. So you see, this is much appears to be much more radical, much more stronger and wider in scope and perspective, and much more, I would say, perhaps, I'm not sure if that's a good word or not, long-termist, although that long-termist view is kind of concept is kind of not very positively received. But anyway, it looks in, it is concerned about long-term perspective rather than short-term, and also has a very strong moral, ethical component to it. So when it becomes a exercise or practice at the societal level, it goes beyond just summing up personal preferences grounded in comprehensive understanding of good life, comprehension of root causes of our crisis, plus collective action. So there are three elements to this one. One is a comprehensive understanding of good life that is inclusive. We are adopting our insights from progressive movements, from life itself. It needs a comprehension of root causes of our crisis. It can't be without that. Otherwise, it becomes idealistic, just daydreaming or something, or nice ideas. And then final element of that is collective action. These good ideas based on good understanding of the status quo and what's wrong with the status quo should go hand in hand with collective action, with movements, or what we call non-reformist reforms. There are reforms, but non-reformist in the sense that they are not trivial. They really address the various structures. That is called non-reformist reform, a reform that is not superficial. Um, so uh, yes, and then it should be very contextual. It shouldn't be treated, the well-living paradigm shouldn't be treated as a blueprint, but it should, because, the meaning of life could be the meaningfulness of life is very much dependent in different contexts, different times, different perspectives of, societies, etc., etc. But that doesn't mean that we should become blind to problems, that in each context exist. We know that many societal contexts are themselves suffering from hierarchies and etc., etc. So we need to make sure that everybody in that context has the opportunity to speak their mind and to contribute to the development of their model of well-living. Otherwise it becomes something imposed. It becomes something like a blueprint, or becomes something that is not going to be functional. It would be pushed back. So there needs to be a balance between the local context and universal principles that are behind this well-living paradigm. So it is let me know when you're tired, and I can stop, or when you want to leave, and then we can study the rest of it whenever you like. So the well living has four principles. One is livability, and then I'll go through them: creativity, conviviality, and alterity. I won't go through them because they may sound a little bit complex, but I would like to invite you to watch this one, which is a very short 4 minute, yeah, for about 5 minute, 5 minute explanation in very simple terms that goes through this livability, creativity, conviviality, and alterity as the principles of the well-living paradigm. I made this myself, so it looked like a very short kind of documentary with a bit of a music in the background. I'm not very, yeah, professional, but also has components. So it has four principles, but also four components. Objective, subjective, intersubjective, and transsubjective. Objective, like the tangible material aspects of good life, the physical health, the psychobiological health, mental health, affective, and nutritional well-being, access to good food, everything that is material and tangible, access to public welfare positions, social security, safe and secure living environments, tackling crime, violence, corruption, the health of geoecological ecosystems, sustainable environmental practices. You see, it's very multidimensional. The well-living is very it's not only not limited to the economy, because we normally consider the economic as material, but even it's a perception of material, it's much wider than economy. It includes mental health, it includes access to good housing, good food, etc., etc. The issue of violence, corruption, the even geo-ecological ecosystems, sustainable environments, all those aspects. You see that it's very much related to how livable good life is. The subjective aspect is more about our perceptions, our cognitive aspects, how we feel. You see that again, we, not just I, how we feel, how people feel, their spiritual well-being, connection to inner self, as you said, self-care, higher purposes, a keen sense of identity, self-awareness, self-understanding, internal feelings of well-being. So the subjective, we don't say it's everything is objective. We acknowledge that there is also a strong subjective. You can be objectively well off, but subjectively not. The way do you understand it's or the way you understand yourself is an unhealthy one. Not just self as an individual, but also at the community level. So it's intersubjective, and this highlights the issue of solidarity and trust and confidence among the members of the communities. And we know that we're not dealing with just one single community. So there's a society includes many communities, including non-human communities. And it's therefore it's the dimension of transsubjective. That means that interactions between groups and communities, individuals with their broader societies beyond their community. Your relationship with the institution that employs you, for instance, the work-life balance. If you don't have work-life balance, you don't have a good life. So you see that the idea of well-living here is multidimensional, and many other concepts of well-being that exist are also multidimensional. But this one is multidimensional as comprehensive as it can be. And then it's multi-level. So it's not just about me and this moment. The personal and household is just one level. The micro-communal, the local neighborhood, workplace, community level. Meso-communal, the town, city, at the town and city level. We all need to look at each one of these levels and see if people have good life or not. The national societal level, the international societal level. And it's not all about geography, but also ideology or identity communities. Communities are not just physical, or geographical, like my neighborhood. It can be also, for instance, Christian community, Muslim community, or I don't know, Iranian Australian community, or Italian Australian communities. So it's ethno-religious aspect. So that level also is included. So it's multi-level, and a good life is a life that is satisfactory in all those levels. That results in balance, etc., etc. But then you may say, well, what are the signs of good life? How do we know that we have a we enjoy good life, or well living? Um, yeah, the paper comes up with 9 interdependent. They are interdependent. They're not separate again. Qualities of well living. Harmonious coexistence, constructive habituality, aspirational foresights and purposefulness, social integrity and agency, conviviality and solidarity, valuing life as commons, authenticity and unalienation, liberate. They're all very mouthful, I'm afraid, but there are actually outlined here that each one of these qualities, what do they mean here? For instance, harmonious coexistence is about balance, inner but also within family and community, globally and with nature. Is a holistic balance, reconciling rational and emotional. Rights and responsibilities are in balance, work and life are in balance, and that's all aimed towards equilibrium. And for instance, constructive habit. Many of us have very destructive, unfortunately, self-destructive habits, like, for instance, I don't know, constantly watching, I don't know, TV series, or getting too much involved in the digital space, etc., etc., or smoking, or not exercising, not going for a walk, etc., etc., disregarding each other emotionally, disconnections. These habits are very destructive, and these are not good signs of good life. Quite the opposite. A good life would require a society to be able to be empowered to replace those bad habits with good habits. You can think of yourself, but also people around you. Also, you can study your society, see what the studies tell us about the bad habits that are quite common these days, and how we can overcome them. But to overcome the bad habits, remember, it's not about buying a self-help book, although individually it might be helpful, some of them. But remember, the system, it's the system that results in the bad habits to become widespread. When something is widespread, you can't explain it individually anymore. The very fact that many of us now in need of self-help books or guidance or trainers or whatever, that means the fact that many of us are like that or feeling like that means we're actually, the issue is sociological. The issue is actually now system related. And as the result of that, the well-living paradigm can't just say, let's publish as many self-help books as possible. It means that actually we need to see how the system is actually pushing us into adopting, spending hours and upon hours, gaming, computer gaming, etc. So among young people, especially boys. So or self-destructive body images. They're all things that we need to see how they are related to the system, and how by changing that system, these behaviors start to change. So it's not about putting pressures individually on ourselves, Um, Aspirational foresights and being purposeful is about finding and creating meaning in life, balancing short-term needs with long-term perspectives, being creative, proactive, future-oriented, sense of purpose. How much sense of purpose we have, or society, our society has, people, young people like us have, and you know what drives people forward, etc., etc. So, and are they constructive or destructive, etc., etc. So authenticity, yeah, social integrity and agency, you can have a look at this, you know. I have tried to be as explicit as possible in explaining each one of these. So there are non-qualities that we can translate them into uh, uh, means or tools of evaluating our situation, uh, globally, locally, nationally, and one of the things that I have done through a research project that it was done by my PhD candidate from Newcastle. They actually, we translated this into a number of questions, into a questionnaire, and we used that in order to multiple, in a one quantitative and one qualitative, so it was a mixed method to actually assess the situation, Muslim community's situation, in terms of these 9 qualities. So they can be actually operationalized into kind of research tools. But remember, when you turn them into research tools, tools are tools. They would only just give you an overview, just some ideas about what's going on. We need to get actually more deeply engaged with the communities through practical things, you know, practical projects, in order to get a much deeper understanding of what's going on, and put the solutions to test, come up with the solutions together with the community members, and put those solutions to test in a kind of a very participatory way, not that just me or you as researchers dictating anything to the community, as if we know them better than themselves. Does that make sense? So these 9 qualities just don't come out of blue. They are very much related to those four principles: the livability, creativity, conviviality, and alterity. The livability is very obvious, you know, how livable things are. Creativity is about, you know, how creative the members of a community are in terms of, you know, fulfilling their own capacities and faculties, and coming up with new things that would sustain life. Conviviality is about their solidarity and friendship and trust and integrity. And alterity is about, you know, liberation, about autonomy, that you can determine your destiny yourself. I mean, yourself, either as individual or as collective. This is another maybe 2 minute, less. Oh yeah, 2 minute, about 2 minute, that applies this
value dynamics in the
yeah, again, this is a very 2 minute documentary I made as a non-professional person. If you have time, you may watch that. Again, it applies these 4 principles in the case of food production in Australia, and you can see how this can be actually applied in that case. Um, so, as I said before, the well-living paradigm is not about wishful thinking. What would that mean? It means that it needs to translate itself into changes or shifts in our institutions. So our current institutions, our dominant institutions, are no longer helpful in term when we want to pursue a well living or good life, in that kind of very comprehensive, according to that comprehensive perspective. So our economic institutions need to be changed, and you can see I've tried to outline what sort of economic institutions in that paper. what sort of economics institutions we want to have. And you can compare it with the economic institutions like the markets and banking systems, etc., financial systems, a manufacturing sector, etc., etc. You can compare this with the existing ones, the mining industries, and see how close they are to this perspective. So it is not about just wishful thinking or dreaming, but also these, those 9 qualities, as I said before, can be translated into some tools in order to study societies, how close they are to that idea of good life. But the rest of this paper is about institutional changes. They can be actually translated into policies of a new political party, or maybe a movement that would push for political changes in all these institutions, the economic institutions, the political institutions, the cultural institutions, the media, or the communicative institutions, the education systems, the even family, or religious or faith-based systems, they or institutions, they are subject to reforming, uh, a deep reforming, non-reformist reforming, and they can actually translate it into very strong policies. Or at least when you go and vote, you can see how close the person I'm voting, or the political party that I'm voting for, is to such person. If to the extent, of course, you in agreement with this perspective, with the well-living perspective, that give you a kind of a framework for comparisons. For instance, economic institutions should be organized around solidarity, cooperation, care, justice, and not just profit. They should be non-exploitative, from each according to their capacity, to each according to their basic needs, plus their contribution to overall well-living. And it should be commons-based ownership. As I said before, the idea of not even ownership, but even a stewardship should be promoted. And there are actually examples of that. We are not very familiar with such examples. You think that these are just, again, demands, but they're not. There have been, people have put things to practice and to test, and there are already institutions, economic institutions, that are aligned with this perspective, like the idea, the solidarity economy, worker co-ops, community initiative. There, I know that you're very busy with this course and other courses, and this is not the subject of writing an essay or something, but if you do SOCA 2400, we actually cover this. You can choose one of these to study. For instance, solidarity economy, for instance. From endless growth toward meeting genuine needs, degrowth principles, resource generation, participatory decision making and production, ethical value chains, decentralized, localized production where feasible, integrating indigenous knowledge into production, into managing the economy, rigorous ecological impact assessments, technology for common good, alternative exchange mechanisms like time banks, local currencies, value beyond money, participatory resource allocation, care work recognized, progressive redistribution, community-based welfare. They are very interesting ideas that have been explored. They don't make headlines. That's why we're not familiar with them. But if you search, you can even find dictionaries or encyclopedias or handbooks. Or if you can, you can go to websites like New Economy Network Australia, or the website I run called the Common Alternatives website. Or there's another one, Next System Project website. And there are people who study and give visibility to these initiatives, So they're not just simply dreaming things. They're things that people all across the world, many people are involved in producing them. when we started to study this alternative seeking organization, although only 96 ended up answering, it was 106, but 96 fully answered the questionnaire. So yeah, that's not a actually big number, but the directory that we developed had at least about more than 500 organizations just in Australia, each one of them. We were not lucky; it was in the middle of 2021 COVID breakout and then pandemic, and it was very difficult to reach out to them. Many offices were closed, and were running out of a staff, and then they only a small number, 96, could answer our questionnaire. But the directory, I couldn't believe that we had that many organizations actively involved in each one of these. And again, you see, I'm talking about only economic institutions, and I'm kind of contradicting myself, if you may remember. But to some extent, it is because we are already divided between the economy and the political. That's why I'm talking only about economic institutions. Otherwise, economic institutions should be as economic as social as social as economic, as political as economic, as ecological as economic. And it's a bit of a shortcoming on my side to only focus, to separate them from each other. And that's the limitation that the system has already imposed on my way of presenting this. Again, the political institutions should be decentralized, become participatory. The parliament can become the council of all councils, citizen assemblies making decisions locally at the council level, dealing citizen assemblies, coming together in order to deal with the collective concerns and issues and problems, etc., etc. We have already talked about participatory budgeting, if you may remember last week, etc., etc. So our political institutions also need to be thoroughly and structurally reformed. Are you guys still with me, or I can't see you? Yeah, okay. Only Ethan. Oh, thank you, Ethan. You're the only one staying.
Yeah,
Staying.
no, I'm probably gonna head out soon. Although
Oh,
the recording is pretty helpful, so I
oh,
don't know.
yeah, thank you so much. You're actually the reason that this recording continued. And well, I just then uh, speed up, if that's okay.
Okay, sure, sure.
Yeah, so it's then the cultural reforms that we need to, the cultural institutions, education, how education should be, how culture should be, how media should be, in especially the media ownership, media control, etc., etc. Journalism, local journalism should be supported. We should move away from corporate media to community-owned media. Um, Open access, treating information as common goods, etc., etc. And then finally, the social and communal institutions, like when we talk about social institutions, we mean family, religion, the legal system, welfare system. We already talked about media and education separately, um, as cultural institutions. So yeah, again, prioritizing the well-living qualities, decentralized, participatory, etc., etc. So if you look at this, you see significant but very important and essential changes are required, and they all need to be based on a new legislative framework that we need to push for changes in the legislations, in not just policies but also even the constitutions, need to be changed, need to be challenged and changed. So that sounds huge, right? But remember, where did capitalism come from? Where did feudalism come from? They didn't come from the heavens. They were built, brick by brick, piece by piece, by the people over decades, over centuries, until they replaced the previous system. And as Martin Luther King says, uh, capitalism has actually outlived its benefits, if it had any benefits actually. So it's time to think deeply and widely and widely and broadly and so this is the kind of perspective or level. I think I'm already finished. So yeah, this is the wrap up. That again, the four principles are stressed in the conclusion of the paper. A continuous process. So the well living shouldn't be seen as something that we would achieve, something as a product, but rather it should be considered as a process that needs to be adaptable to different contexts, different settings. People need to participate in building that, in interpreting those principles, and operationalizing or implementing those principles in their lives. And these principles are of course, for reflection and conversation. No one, or people like you and me, or people who come up with these ideas, are no one to push anyone into anything. They are actually not coming from us. They are just our job in order to by looking into many efforts, learning from them, and like a honeybee that does the cross fertilization, we would just learn from this group or from this experience and record it and spread the news, spread the words, spread the ideas. So a lot of these organizations that I mentioned, a lot of these movements that I mentioned, they are not well aware of each other. And that's an issue. That's a problem. They don't know actually there is in their neighborhood maybe or somewhere close by, there are groups that are working on something that actually helps this group to overcome their barriers or to become even better and more effective. You know what I mean? So it is, I think, if you ask me what is the most important, the most imperative thing that we can do in social sciences in order to do something good for the planet, for ourselves, for future generations, is actually to give visibility to all these good things, all these demands, all these ideals, all these practices, and a lot of them actually can come together without contradicting each other. A lot of times it's just misunderstandings or alienation, the fact that they don't make headlines and they're not well aware of each other. That is something that can be overcome by our efforts. Unfortunately, the system is blind. Not much grants, not much money in there. No system would actually put a red carpet in front of the people who want to push for something better. Every system wants to have that inertia of maintaining things as they are, the business as usual. And it is, again, if we're looking for responsibility and we want to be responsible, not only in terms of self-care, the real self-care comes when we actually care about each other, care about our future. Sorry, I took it to make it too long, but I hope it was useful and made you and those who would listen to this later on interested in this topic. We need we need more people interested because there's not much money in it, but it's our human power that can actually be their great source. Um, like many of these people who are involved in these projects, progressive projects, are doing it voluntarily. Any questions, anything you want to raise or anything that needs clarifications, please let me know.
No, I think that's all right for now. Yeah. Let me think if there's something. I just maybe want to ask your opinion is do you think like measuring well-being is still a good idea, even though like capitalism tends to like turn everything into a metric? Do you still think it's valuable for us to like measure well-being, or even if it's in some sort of other way, do you think that's still a good thing for a society to have like a metric of well-being?
I'm not against it. I practically I've done it for the Muslim community here actually.
Yeah, right.
Um, but first thing first, it only it only surveys the surface, as I said before. We need to be very well aware of how limited it is, and the fact that when we quantify things, we lose that necessary deeper insight unless we complement it with other methods, with other ways of probing things, and that needs to be kind of action. I don't know if you're familiar with the idea of action research. It needs to be action research. It needs to be complemented with qualitative aspects. And that's one thing. The second thing that we need to consider is that, again, our definition of well-being. If that's the definition of well-being, most of the time, the well-being that is being measured is actually well-having.
Yeah.
Well-having. Do I have access to public transport? Yeah, that's great. That's a good thing to have, that everybody would have access to public transport. But uh, when you say access to public transport, you're looking at the individual, or maybe at the community is the sum of individuals, and access is something passive. Do they have not only access but also control over it? Uh, and if that public transport is a burden on the environment or not. And you know what I mean? So is that, do we consider non-human beings in this conversation, in this perception of well-being or not? So that is, that's why I have come up with this idea of well-living, to come up with something more, not only more comprehensive, but also something that takes a step back, and it looks at the society's ability to achieve what we think they should have, and their autonomy and their control over that. So you can have a society that is quite prosperous, but as the result of exploiting other societies, and everybody enjoys, luxurious houses, or very, lots of money and good amounts of things to consume, access to all public services, etc., etc. But it's a society that is built up in other people's lands. Uh, I don't want to mention name of one country that I have in my mind, otherwise I will be perhaps criticized or lose my job. But anyway, so this colonial settlements, settlement colonialism, colonialist states, they may bring lots of prosperity and well-having for their citizens, but on someone else's land.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
you know what
I get that, how there's a lot more to well-being than like what's underneath.
Yeah, or
But
the country, for instance, is huge exporter of cell phones and things like that. That may sound not very harmful, but there are lots of materials in them that, when they not recycled properly, they damage the environment. But also weapons and explosives, and or technologies that are used in advanced weaponry. And this country treats its citizens even quite equally, providing them with welfare. And some of these Scandinavian countries are like that, and then we consider them as, oh, wow, these are good examples. We should actually strive to become like them. But where does that come from? Where does that prosperity comes from? Even if it is kind of equally distributed, even if it is kindly distributed. So we need to go beyond that, and as this modernist perspective of well-being. Did I answer you?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Okay. So,
Yeah, my computer's about to die, so I should probably,
oh, that's okay. No
yeah,
worries.
before
I'm
I
done on this. Yeah.
spontaneously,
If you have any questions, email me, and I'm more than happy. Or we can have an well, this is the last week, but if it is possible, we can even have conversation on Zoom again, or later on.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thanks so much then.
Oh, thank you so much for staying to the end
Yeah,
and making recording possible, actually.
that's okay.
I'm so glad. Thank you so much. I owe you for that.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks so much for teaching. It was super
Yeah.
interesting.
And yeah, I forgot to ask the group if they could actually fill out that survey, a student survey.
Yeah.
That would be nice because the main reason is that because I taught this course for the first time, I really need to have some ideas how to improve it for the next time. So that would be very helpful to have your feedback, if possible, please.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
Okay. Yeah. And everything okay with the podcast? You
Yeah,
tweak and
I'm
time
working.
and oh, good, good. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think
All
it's
the best then.
okay. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And maybe see you next semester, maybe.
Yeah, probably. I probably will take another SOC course, but
Okay. All the best. See you.
okay. Thanks. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Have a good day.
You too.